and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 231, and today's date is December 5th, 2013, and the title of this report is White House Reports Stolen Radioactive Material Pose No U.S. Threat Whatsoever. We are all safe. They have everything handled, but I have completely different information about what happened in Mexico, and we will get to that during this report. And let's get into the economic collapse news. What we're going to go out to France right now. And the president out there, and I've said this in many other reports, has always told us that they're coming out of the recession. Things are getting better. Don't worry about it. And again, I go back to what I've always said. Whenever a government official comes out and tells you something, it is always the opposite. It is always the opposite of what they are saying. And what we are seeing in France right now, and we have to understand that the entire Eurozone and all these European countries, and let's include Australia, Canada, the United States, we are all part of this Western central banking system where they're loaning the money out, and this is creating debt among the nations. And this debt is growing like a virus and like a cancer that cannot be stopped. And as it gets larger and larger and larger, all of these countries start to run into problems like very high unemployment because they start implementing austerity, which we know absolutely does not work. Because when you implement austerity, you cut people's jobs, you cut programs, and you take on more debt with more interest. If you have more interest and less people working, and you cut programs, guess what happens? The private sector feels it, the public sector feels it, and you just increase unemployment. That's pretty much what happens. And now you have a lot more money, a lot more interest that you have to pay off, but no revenue to do it. So what happens? They need to borrow some more money. And what is the IMF and the central banks and all of them? They say, all right, you want more money? This is what you got to do. You got to cut more jobs, you got to cut more programs, and we will give you more debt, and your interest payments will go higher. And they do not have the revenue, and this is a continuous cycle. So what are we seeing in France right now? We're seeing that the unemployment has surged to a 16-year high. They are at 11.03% of unemployment. And right now, for those over 50, the unemployment is reached 8.2%. And this unemployment is rising very quickly because this is what happens. I mean, we saw it in every single country, and they will soon be up to 17, 18, 19, 20%, just like all the other countries. Now, in Spain cannot pay off its debt. It can't handle the interest payments. They have a huge deficit. So what are they doing? Well, they looked at the U.S. and they said, hey, the U.S. raided their Social Security system, so why don't we do the same exact thing? So Spain is raiding their Social Security reserves, and what they're going to do is they're going to take about 5 billion euros from the Social Security Reserve Fund, and they're going to use this to pay all their bills. And what they're going to do is, since that won't be enough, later on they're going to have to withdraw another 428 million from the Social Security reserves to pretty much handle all of their payments on this debt. But what's very interesting about this is that the Wall Street Journal back in October 29th, and you can see how the corporate media and the government officials all spin everything, and they like to tell you that everything is fine. I remember back in when Greece got the first bailout, and they said, oh, Greece is fine now. They're on their way to a recovery, and we see right now that Greece is barely limping along. They're on their third bailout. Unemployment is just astronomical. The youth unemployment is over 60%, and they are just suffering over there. So the Wall Street Journal said on October 29th, the Wall Street said that Spain is in line to meet the 2013 deficit target. Well, here we are in the beginning of December, and they're stealing money from the Social Security Reserve Fund. So that is completely false. And then you have the deputy budget minister out there saying our budget targets are perfectly compatible with an economic recovery. Again, whatever these government officials say, it is always the opposite. They're not meeting anything. They're in big trouble. They're looking for money and they're taking it from other places. And of course they're saying, "Oh, we'll repay it." The US took all the money from Social Security back when Clinton was president. They replaced it with Treasury bonds, and there is no money in the Social Security fund. And this is how these governments work. And they make people believe that everything is fine, but they're just moving money around, stealing money from different places to make things look like everything is fine. And the corporate media is out there letting everyone know that, look, they're on their way to a recovery, when we can see that they completely are not. And if you look across Europe and you look across the Eurozone, right now the young people in Southern Europe, about 90% say it is a bad time to find a job. There are no jobs. We cannot find any. Now, if we look at people in the Western Europe, they say that's about 67% saying that they cannot find work. And if you look at Eastern Europe, it's about 68%. So what we are seeing here is that the whole entire Eurozone, the youths that are coming out of school, that are ready to take on work, cannot find any jobs at all. And it is the same thing that is happening here in the United States. The youths that are graduating college cannot find work at all. And we have to remember, just a couple reports that I did ago, the government was out there saying that they're going to modify student loans. Now, why would they have to do this if unemployment is going down, people are finding work, the economy is recovering? Why would you have to modify the student loans? Why would you have to give them extensions? Why would you have to lower their payments? Well, the only reason you'd have to do that is because, one, they can't find jobs. Two, they found a job, but it's a part-time job and they're living with their parents and they really can't make ends meet. That is the only reason, because just like the housing market, these students are coming out with huge amount of student loans and they are completely underwater. Now, I reported in my last report about how these car manufacturers are channel stuffing, how the government is making it easier for the subprime creditors to get loans. And what is happening right now is the subprime people are getting loans, but most of them are starting to default on these car loans. And this is a big problem. They're starting to repossess the vehicles. And of course, we knew this was going to happen. Just like in the real estate market when the crash came and those people who really couldn't afford the house, of course, those people went first. And, at the time, they took out ARMs. These are adjustable rate mortgages. Interest rate went up. They couldn't afford it anymore. They just dumped their houses. The other people who just barely were getting by lost their jobs. They had to sell their houses, and eventually it went to the other people who were able to afford their houses but just lost their jobs and could never find anything at the same pay rate, and they started losing their houses. And this is why the Fed right now is pumping in $40 to $45 billion a month to the banks to buy the toxic real estate, because they're trying to get the real estate off the bank's books, giving them money, and they're directed to put that money back into the stock market, and that's why you see the market rising. And this is what we're seeing right now. But the average student debt, their debt has climbed to $29,400, and that is up 63% in less than a decade. And these students do not have the resources to pay this back. And all you hear from the government is go back to school, go back to school. And you know what happens when you keep going back to school? You get further and further into debt. And if there are no jobs, it doesn't help you at all. Now, we had some really great news today that GDP soared to 3.6%, and everything looks great. We're on the road to recovery. We have Biden out there campaigning with other Democratic leaders, letting everyone know that the recovery is in full swing. The Fed is out there saying that they're looking at tapering because unemployment is coming down. Everything looks fantastic. And this is all set up for what is coming. But if we look closer and we see, what are they saying when they say 3%, 3.6% GDP? Because we have to remember, they changed all the calculations. They went back in time to 1929, and they changed all the calculations up to this point, so we have a positive GDP. But what we are seeing right now is the following. Now, the U.S. consumer is getting weaker, as we know, because they don't have the job or they're underemployed and they don't have the disposable income. Retailers are doing poorly because, again, people are not spending. But what are they doing? They are stocking up more and more inventory to take advantage of, hopefully, the consumers will spend on the merchandise. So they are buying the manufactured goods and they are stocking up like crazy, hoping that the people will purchase. And this made the GDP rise at this time. So this is what we have right now. That 230 billion in total increase in GDP, 146 billion of this, or over 63%, was due to inventory stockpiling, inventory hoarding. That they're hoping that these consumers will purchase during the holiday season. But according to everything that we've seen and the numbers that are coming out and the predictions from all the retailers, they are expecting a horrible, horrible holiday season. And let me just say, if we go back before 1994, we use the unmanipulated numbers. What we see is 24, 25%, and there's some reports saying that it's close to 30% people unemployed, and then we have underemployed. We are not going to see a good Christmas season, and you're going to see a lot of this revised. And right now everything looks good because they're trying to keep the illusion that things are getting better so they can pull off the next event. Now, we've had the BLS has come out and said that unemployment initial claims have tumbled to 298,000. It was below expectations, so things look really great. It was a 23,000 drop, so unemployment looks like it's getting better. Of course, this all fits into the recovery model that they want to make everyone believe. It is a complete illusion. The Fed is the complete market. It controls everything. There is no free market at this time, and we know come December 28th, about 1.3 million or so people are falling off the extension of unemployment, and the government has a choice right now of extending this unemployment or just letting those people fall off the job market, and the unemployment rate is going to fall dramatically. And if it falls dramatically, the Fed is going to sit there and say, oh, we need to really taper now because now we're in the 6.7% range and we're very close to our goal, and I believe it's time to taper. Right now, the White House is pushing to get the extension continued, and we will have to see how this plays out. And I said this in my other reports. It will be very interesting. It'll be kind of an indicator to see if this event is completely set up and ready to go, because if they do not extend this the extension to unemployment, the Fed will then have to come out and say we are tapering around February, March, and all bets are off and the event will occur. If they decide to extend this, that means we don't have things all set up and it might be a little bit later than we think. But we'll have to see how this plays out, and it is a good indicator to let us know how things are working out for this. Now, we know in the Ukraine, they decided to go with Russia and not the EU, because they looked at the EU and they saw, the EU is completely in debt the EU countries are struggling to survive, and they realized if they go with the EU, we just end up in debt. And the Ukraine needs an injection of money really bad. And they went to China to get $8 billion, and they secured this, and they have this money now to keep the country working. They didn't go to the Fed, they didn't go to the EU. It's, again, they went to China to get this money. Now, speaking about China, we understand what's going on here. I mean, I've said this in my other reports. China says they're taking on no more U.S. treasuries. They are no longer holding foreign currencies. They don't see it as a benefit. They're going to be selling the oil using the yuan, the petro yuan, if you like to say that. Russia has said that they do not want to hold U.S. dollars. They believe it's going to collapse in 2017 or sooner. And right now, the Chinese leaders are actively talking about the internationalization of the yuan, and this is the next step. We also understand that China and has made an agreement with Kenya to be a clearinghouse. They made a deal with the UK in trade. They're setting up banks there to doing a currency swap, and we understand that all of this is starting to create and set the yuan up to be the next reserve currency. And right now, they're trying to decouple the yuan from the dollar and make the U.S. bonds unattractive to anyone except the U.S. Fed. And we have to remember, the United States is selling the Treasury bonds. And what China has said is that we are going to reject additional Treasury bonds. So where do these Treasury bonds go? Well, they just don't go floating off into the atmosphere. Someone needs to buy them. And guess who's going to buy all the rejected U.S. Treasury bonds that China is no longer purchasing? Well, that's going to be the Fed. And this is where we're having the problem. And this report goes on to say Beijing closed the liquidity tap, and now the U.S. will have to choose between spending less and monetizing more. Now, it goes on to say if the White House spends less, it will have to refrain from wars, cut the social safety nets, and a part of corporate subsidies. Or the Fed can monetize the debt, buying the T-bill refused by China. But such actions will send the dollar into a tailspin, crashing its purchasing power. This is a no-win situation for Washington. And what I see right now is there is no way right now that they are going to cut social programs and refrain from war. Because their other alternative is to continually, and if they do that, the entire system just comes collapsing down. They are going to increase quantitative easing and produce war. This is how the central bankers have done this all throughout time. This is the path that the central bankers are on. There is no way in the world that they will taper, let the market fall, and then start implementing austerity. It's impossible. They are going to increase quantitative easing. They are going to really rev up the war machine to get the war started, because they need to take the focus off of themselves and the U.S. government. And this is the path they will be heading on. And this is why they're letting everyone know that they would like to increase quantitative easing. And they told us 50%, but it's going to be more. Just like they told us, Ben Bernanke said they're not going to monetize the debt back in 2008. And, they did quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and, there are reports out there that it's even more than $85 billion a month. So for a fact it's not going to be 50%, it's not going to be 100%, because when these foreign nations reject and start selling masses of amounts of treasury bonds, and other nations get wind and start dumping the dollars, they are going to have to pick up the slack. And they can't continually do this forever. So they're going to have to do one or two things: just let the economy collapse, or start a war. And you know what they're going to do. They're going to start a war. Now, the U.S. government, they understand that those people in power understand that the collapse is coming, and they understand that they need to create the list of the people in the United States, and they need to spy on everyone. And we pretty much kind of assumed that they were collecting more than the metadata that Dianne Feinstein has told us. That's all they're doing, and we know they're lying, because that's all they do, is they lie to the American people. They never tell us the truth. And right now, more information has come out that the NSA is using cell phones to track the movements of millions of people daily. I don't know if this really comes as a surprise to anyone. It doesn't to me. I believe that they're tracking every single person. I believe using the facial, the social media, and everything that they're looking up in emails and in text, they are creating these massive amounts of social profiles to keep track of everyone, to keep the connections of who knows who, what groups you're a part of, who are you listening to, what you believe in, what you don't believe in, and all of this is to place you in a certain group, and eventually when the time comes, just like in Nazi Germany, they will be coming to your home to get you. And this is what's going to happen. And to make it easier, what they want to do is disarm the American people. And this is their main goal. This is what they've been trying to do for all of these years. This is the end game, and this is why they are pushing it so hard right now. Listen, John Kerry already signed the UN Arms Treaty. They have the gun bill that Dianne Feinstein put out there, pending in the Senate, and we understand from New York how easy it is for those people to be scared when they get a letter from the government saying, "Listen, your weapon is over, the certain amount of rounds that you're allowed to keep, and you need to turn it in." And I'm going to say, the majority of the people will turn it in. I always go under the 80-20 rule. And what I mean by this is, and this works for almost everything, and sometimes it's a little different, 70-30, 15, 95, 85, I mean. And this always seems to fit. 20% of the people always do the work, while the 80% are along for the ride. So 80% of the people will eventually turn in their weapon, while the other 20% will not. If we look back at the revolution and all this and all these things, it's always 20% of the people who were fighting for the freedom. The 80% were just riding along on their coattails. And this always seems to happen. It happens in corporate America. It happens in everyday life. Just take a look around, use that little formula, and you will see that it seems to be always the same way. Now, there is a person out there, Sami Kamkar, who created a drone that can hack in to other drones. And the drone platform called Skyjack, he created using readily available components such as the Parrot AR drone quadcopter, a Raspberry Pi circuit board, and an open source software. And what he does is he flies it up there, and he uses the Wi-Fi to detect other Parrot drones in its range, and then injects Wi-Fi packets into the victim's drone's connection, and making it de-authenticate from its remote control, and he takes the control of the drone. And this is actually good to know, because when the government comes after us with drones, it is nice to know that we are able to hack into them. Again, you can use your shotgun or your rifle to bring them down, and this is actually really good to know, and I believe this is headed in the right direction, where we can hack into drones and control them ourselves and turn it on the people who are actually chasing after us. Now, we know the French president has said that, France is coming out of the recovery, that things are getting better, and we know it's not. And right now, France is going to invade pretty much Central Africa. France has a duty to intervene, The president says. The president says Central Africa massacres are continuing. The president says situation in Central Africa alarming and frightening, but don't worry, it's an in and out operation, and we'll have everything under control. But why are they going into Central Africa? Well, because they know their economy is collapsing. They know the Eurozone is collapsing. And what are they doing? They're in Central Africa for the natural resources. They're in Mali to get the gold. That's why they're in there. They're losing control, so they're sending more forces there. That's all they're doing. Every country right now is running around trying to buy or get as much gold or other natural resources as they possibly can before the collapse, because they understand that the US dollar, the Eurozone, will not be able to sustain what is going on here. And this is why all these countries are looking for money all over the place, taxing people like there's no tomorrow, because they are turning into desperate countries where they know this is the end game, and they understand that China will be the next reserve currency, and the collapse of the Western central banks is coming, and they understand that war will be coming to every single nation. So they want to get the natural resources right now before this happens, and they are very desperate to do this at this time. And this is why the Pentagon has come out, which widens the U.S. drone kill box, which pretty much they're saying it's okay to kill civilians at this time, because what happened was the Pentagon revised its instructions on the use of deadly drone strikes, advising U.S. military personnel to avoid targeting civilians instead of requiring them to ensure civilians are not targeted. So right now, instead of not targeting civilians, they're saying try to avoid them if you can. And you can see that these nations, especially the U.S. and all of Europe, are getting desperate at this time. And we see that Spain is diving into the Social Security reserves. We see the U.S. is heading up more drone strikes, that they're losing control of the Middle East. France is heading into Central Africa. The U.S. is heading into the Arctic to set up submarines and missile bases and to capture the natural resources up there. You see the U.S. encircling China. You see China setting up an air defense zone. You see the U.S. setting up a missile shield from Poland all the way down to Romania, with 40,000 troops of the NATO troops standing by. We see that Russia's saying, well, you're making a deal with Iran. Why do you need the missile shield? And this is what the U.S. said the missile shield was there for, but they're not taking it down. We can see what is happening. Russia is making deals with Egypt, supplying them with military, getting use of their port in Alexandria. They're making deals with Saudi Arabia, and we can see what is going on. Japan has been training with the United States. They have a new warship since World War II. The United States have sent over more destroyers and more military assets over into the Asian Pacific area. They sent a stealth destroyer there. So we can see what's happening here. We can see that this and all of this is being built up because they understand that these central bankers are not going to stop. They are going to carry on like little babies until they get the war started, because they do not want to be left holding the blame for what is about to happen. Now, there has been a cyber attack with J.P. Morgan, and about 500,000 people, their information was hacked into, birth dates, social security, email addresses, bank account information was completely stolen at J.P. Morgan. And we have to remember there is a NeverQuest malware that can infiltrate the banking system. The Chicago Mercantile was hacked into in July. They do not know the effects or the damage. They don't even know if there is a malware sitting dormant on the system. We see many glitches in the NASDAQ, and they have really no explanation. They have glitches in the stock exchange. And again, we have to remember that we've had multiple amount of drills for the power grid. We have multiple amount of drills for the bank cyber attacks. We've had bank collapse simulations. We've had the Fed out there where the banks have to make a living will, a blueprint of how they're going about how they're going to use bail-ins to bail the banks out. We understand that Australia, Canada, the Eurozone, United States, the UK, and Switzerland now all have documentation and blueprints on how to do bail-ins, and it was confirmed that they will be taking the depositors' money when the banks collapse. I didn't say if, I said when. And if we look back to the original story of J.P. Morgan, the FBI and the Secret Service are investigating the matter, and the bank said it has no clue who is behind this type of attack. Now, there is a report saying that cyber attacks are up 15% this year and are going to rise even further next year. Financial institutions, power grid are getting hammered with more and more cyber attacks. And right now, the water and wastewater industry has put out a warning that more and more cyber attacks are hitting their sector, and they are experiencing large increases in incidents this year. And they're saying many of the cyber attacks are trying to shut down the systems, trying to make the systems go haywire, and it's getting more and more difficult to stop what is happening at this time. There was a report out there saying that Bitcoin, and I understand that Bitcoin has been rising quite rapidly, and if you look at the graph, and I think Greg Manarino had this up there, if you look at it, it looks like a complete bubble. And right now, this report has come out that Bitcoin developer confirms he is working with government to give control power to the U.S. government. And there is a video on the x22report.com site. You can go take a look at it. If you just click on the link for the title of this report, which is White House Report Stolen Radioactive Material Pose No U.S. Threat, just click on it, scroll down, you will see the video for Bitcoin if you'd like to take a look at that. Now, we're seeing the same exact reports that we've seen in the United States, where they're saying the militants from Syria who are coming back to the United States could be radicalized. Europe is saying the same thing, that militants from Syria who've been fighting could be radicalized and pose a threat to the EU. Now, why are they saying this? Well, they're saying this because they're setting up the next false flag event. And I think this is going to be an event like we've never seen before. And we understand yesterday, and I reported on this, and to me, it doesn't sit right with me of what is going on. In Mexico, there was a medical device that was stolen. And this happens a lot in Mexico, as I've been reading up on this. But this story came out. It was stolen, and it had cobalt 60, which is a radioactive material that they use in the medical industry, and it was stolen. And then a couple hours later, the truck was found, and the casing was opened up, and they detect radioactivity, and they're saying the perpetrators, are exposed to the radiation. And this is what disturbs me and doesn't sit right with me, and I'll explain to you. It was stolen. There was no warning on DHS or any other, or even the government's terror website. There was nothing on there whatsoever. The White House came out and said the Obama administration has no reason to believe that a stolen shipment of highly radioactive cobalt-60 recovered in central Mexico posed a threat to the United States. The missing material was found, removed from its protective container Wednesday, near where the stolen truck transporting the material was abandoned in central Mexico. Okay, so they got involved in this, and they're letting everyone know that it doesn't pose a threat. Now, whoever said it did pose a threat, they didn't have any warnings on DHS or any other terror network, FBI, CIA, nothing. But they decided to come out and say this. First rule of thumb, whatever they say, it's always the opposite. Then you read more about it in different publications, and they said authorities located 40 grams of the cobalt-60 about a half-mile away from the truck's container. Now, we have to say, and when you read this and you read the whole article, you start to believe that they found it and everything's okay. But they located 40 grams. What they forgot to say is that there were 60 grams of the cobalt 60. They recovered 40, 20 is missing. Where is it? And it's very interesting that the White House had to come out and say this at this time, which leads me to believe that something is in the works, because they're leaving out pertinent information that is vital to make sure that we're safe. They have not found the 20 grams of the radioactive material. And this is what disturbs me here. And it always seems that they like to leave out certain information. Now, there's other information, and I reported on this about CNN coming out saying that Assad is hiding chemical weapons, that he has a stash of them, a cache of them, hidden that the UN inspectors didn't know about. Now today, all of a sudden, the opposition, the rebels, the paid mercenaries, came out and said President Assad used poison gas in the civil war on people today. They came out and said we have documented non-casualties from poison gas used by the regime in neighborhoods. People saw white smoke. People are getting injured. People have hard time breathing. And we can see what is happening here. They are preparing for the next false flag event. They're laying the groundwork. They just have to put this information out to make people believe and make people understand what is going on. And this way, the corporate media can spin this any way they want. Again, if they're going to do anything, and we have to think back to the reports, and I mentioned this yesterday, that they're saying that Iran has enough radioactive material to create a dirty bomb. 20 grams of the radioactive material is missing. The White House is telling us that it's safe, it's okay. Don't worry, everyone. We're going to take care of you. It's almost like Obamacare, where they say, don't worry, we're going to give everyone health insurance and it's going to be beautiful. But we can see how they're playing this. Now, the rebels are telling us that Assad has used chemical weapons. Well, how could this be? It must be because he has a hidden cache of chemical weapons. So, how will the central bankers get the war started? Well, it's going to be a multi-pronged false flag event. It's going to be a cyber attack. As you can see, they're laying the groundwork for this. They are laying the groundwork for a dirty bomb because we have Al-Qaeda running around, and of course they're bomb makers. We have the Al-Qaeda leaders, the Syrian, letting us know that they're coming after American civilians. They're also letting us know that they will be setting off small devices around the country. We also know that Assad has been, supposedly hiding chemical weapons, which we know is not true. We understand that the United States is helping dump the chemical weapons out at sea. Some of that might be diverted to America. Who knows? And we can see how this is all playing out. And we also, and I forgot to mention this yesterday, we also have to remember that it was reported that peculiar people were on airplanes where they found a memo warning about terrorist dry runs on airplanes. And this happened a couple weeks ago or so. I have it on the x22report.com sign as a potential false flag. And we can see how this is all starting to fit together. And we know for sure that something is going to happen. They need it. They need this to happen. Things are starting to implode around the central banks, the Fed, the countries. We are in a collapse situation. We do have a little bit of time. I would, if you haven't started preparing, I would, because this, and if you have for the last time during that Syrian event, I would continue to stockpile because this is not going to end well. This will not be where everything just disappears and everyone goes about their normal everyday lives. This is going to be a major, horrific false flag event. It will happen across the country just like 9/11, but worse, because now we are in the end game. There is nothing left for the Fed to do. There is nothing left for the U.S. government to do. They have no way out of this situation at this time. And this is why they are going forward with this event. This is why they are going forward with the war. And this is why everybody needs to be prepared. And you need to prepare yourself monetarily. You need to prepare yourself with food, water, medical supplies. If you have diabetes, a heart problem, high blood pressure, I would stock up on extra medication. I would get toiletries, I would get water, I would get batteries, I would get lanterns. I would have a weapon to protect yourself. This is what we need to do at this time. Listen, everyone, I really appreciate you listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.